These are three foundational core concepts that I think you have to understand and have in place if you want to be effective when you're mastering, whether it's home mastering or actually being a mastering engineer. Now, in the first video, I gave you a kind of overview of the whole process, as I work in Wavelab, but you can use these techniques in any digital audio software that you would like to use. And I also gave an introduction to what mastering is, to me at least, what I think is important about this topic. And in this video, I'm going to talk about the 3 M's of mastering. These are 3 foundational core concepts that I think you have to understand and have in place if you want to be effective when you're mastering, whether it's home mastering or actually being a mastering engineer. And the first M, the first thing I think is absolutely critical, probably won't surprise you, it's monitoring. So the monitoring is the final stage in the chain. It's how you hear what you're working on. And it needs to be right. That doesn't mean it has to be super, super expensive, although it doesn't hurt. But it is possible to get very good results with affordable equipment. And especially if you follow some of the guidelines I'm going to suggest to you, you can even work around working in a space that is not a full-fledged mastering studio. The reason you have to do this is that if your monitoring or your room is not giving you an accurate picture of the music that you're working on, then that music is never going to sound the way that you would hope it will in the outside world. It's kind of like having a filter on your phone when you're taking photographs. If you make all of your judgments about what looks good with this filter across the image, and you take all your photographs, they look good to you with the filter, but then you show them to other people without the filter, they're not going to look the way you expect, and quite possibly aren't going to look as good as you would like. Same thing applies to audio. If you're listening with this extra filter of a colored room response or colored monitoring affecting how you're hearing the music, when that gets played out in the world without the sound of your room and your monitors, it's not going to sound the way that you would expect, and probably not the way that you would like. So what do you need to get reasonable mastering monitoring? I mean, I think the first thing to say is that it needs to be good enough. If you can't hear something, you can't make good judgments about it. So, for example, mastering on earbuds is not going to work. They don't have sufficient bass response, they don't have enough high end, and the frequency response is generally very uneven. So that's not going to work out for you. So you need a decent set of monitors. They need to have a reasonably flat frequency response, and your room needs to be in decent shape. The number one thing that you can do to improve your room is to add some acoustic treatment. This room used to be a garage. It's converted so that I could work at home, and I remember that I couldn't wait. The first day the paint was dry on the walls. I brought the desk in, I set the speakers up, and I started playing some music, and my heart sank. I thought I had made a terrible, terrible mistake. It just sounded clangy and echoey, it was boomy, and it was a disaster. I thought, I've wasted all this money on a room that I'm not going to be able to use. The next day, my acoustic panels arrived. You can see a couple of them behind me there at the back of the room. There are more in front of me and in the corners behind the speakers. I added those into the room, and such a relief, because actually it sounded fine. And it turns out this room actually sounds surprisingly good. That's a combination of luck and the acoustic treatment. So I really recommend you get yourself some acoustic treatment. You don't necessarily have to buy off the peg expensive stuff. You can make acoustic treatment quite affordably yourself. And something else that can be really helpful with your mastering monitoring is the ability to control what you're listening to. For example, here in Wavelab, I can choose whether I want to listen to the default channels, which are stereo in this case, or whether I want to listen to a mono mix at the same volume. I can listen to the left channel on its own or the right channel on its own, but perhaps most usefully, I can choose to listen to the mid channel only. That's left plus right. That's the sum signal. Or the difference signal, which is left minus right, which only plays the audio at the edges of the signal. So you can hear the vocal, the drums, the bass have mostly gone there, and you're hearing much more of the rhythm guitars, which were hard panned. There are lots of other ways of doing this. Lots of monitoring controllers or mixers will allow you to switch what you're listening to in these ways, especially the mono button, which is very useful for checking for compatibility on mobile phones, for example, or smart speakers these days. Or there are software applications as well that can help you switch this stuff. Another possibility, if maybe you don't have a room that you use as a dedicated mixing or mastering space, or maybe acoustic treatment for whatever reason isn't an option for you, is to get a really high quality pair of headphones. I use Sennheiser HD 650s. They're kind of an industry standard. They're not the best headphones in the world, but they're pretty good, and you can get them for a reasonable amount of money. And of course, you could try using some software like SonarWorks, for example, to calibrate those headphones to get the frequency response even more even. The great thing about headphones is that they take the room out of the equation. The music plays straight into your ears, so it doesn't matter whether the room sounds good, whether you have acoustic treatment or not. You're not being fooled in any way by that possible coloration of the sound when you're listening. So headphones can be an option. And then my third suggestion to help you deal with the challenges of getting a good enough monitoring environment are to listen somewhere else. Anywhere that you regularly listen to music will be fine, will work well. And what I suggest you do is, so in a car, on a pair of earbuds, on a smart speaker, wherever that might be, my suggestion is you listen to the mixes, you take a bit of a rest, 2 or 3 days, we can talk about that more in a minute, then listen to the mixes fresh, have a notepad and paper, and just jot down some comments about things that you hear that you think might be a problem in that environment that you're used to. You need to be used to it so that you know how music is supposed to sound, how all your favorite music sounds. And then if yours sounds different in some way, then you can take note of that and take some action. Then you take the notes back into either your mixing, mastering space, or listen on your headphones, however you're doing it, and listen through again and see whether you recognize any of those comments that you made as you listen again. If you do, then you've probably picked up on something that's worth addressing. If you don't, then I would suggest you go out and try a couple of other places. And there's a few possibilities. If you hear it everywhere or most places, it's probably something you want to deal with. If you only hear this problem in one place, that's probably to do with that particular environment, that particular pair of speakers or headphones or the room or whatever. And that's probably not something you need to concern yourself with. So a combination of these 3 different approaches will help you over time get a better idea of what you're hearing. There's a bonus suggestion for you, which is just to listen to a ton of music in your mixing space. So many of us set up a room specifically for audio. All we work on is our own music. And then we take it out into the rest of the world and kind of wonder why it doesn't sound as we would expect. The solution to that is to just listen to a ton of music in your mixing and mastering space. You don't really have to pay attention to it. You just put it on in the background. So when you're doing emails or designing cover artwork or doing your accounts or soldering wires, whatever it might be, subconsciously your brain will learn how all your favorite music, listen to stuff that sounds great to you, that you, whenever you hear it anyway, you think, oh, that sounds amazing. Listen to those songs, and over time you will pick up an instinct for how things should sound, and that will also help you. So that's the first M, monitoring. The second M of mastering that I think is absolutely crucial is metering. Now, I would be the first person to say, do not master or mix with your eyes. You know, our ears are the most important thing. Having said that, especially when you're starting out on the process, having some visual feedback is really useful for helping train our ears, helping understand what we're hearing. You know, to be able to look at something and go, oh, there's a lot of 100 hertz in that. Okay, it sounds this way. Make a mental note. Oh, that one sounds a bit bright. I can see there's a big boost there in the upper mid-range. All of that feedback can really help you, and especially with the issue of loudness. Judging loudness is tricky. We're going to talk about it quite a bit during these videos. It can be a real challenge to hear it well. So having a loudness meter available to you can be invaluable. And I think those two are the fundamental metering requirements for mastering: a great loudness meter and a decent spectral analysis tool. Wavelab has both of those built in. It also has a ton of other useful meters as well. For example, we have an RMS level meter here that gives a slightly different perspective and helps me judge the left-right balance really nicely. It has a phase scope that lets me look at the correlation of the left and right signals, and a live spectrogram, which offers another useful view of the audio. The one that you're definitely going to want is a peak meter. Pretty much every DAW has one of these nowadays, but you also need a true peak meter, and that's something we'll talk about more in a later video. So my second M of mastering is metering, and the third M of mastering is mindset. Mastering is a different process to mixing, and I think there's value in that. One of the most common questions I get asked is whether it's possible and okay to master your music as you mix. And of course, in a technical sense, that's fine, but I think it's a mistake. I think the risk, if you have mastering processing on the stereo output bus of your mix, is that you rely on it too heavily. It can end up doing too much of the heavy lifting, and your mix maybe isn't as good as it would have been without it. I think also there's a risk of overwhelm. As you saw in the overview in the first video, I like to have all of my songs exported as stereo files and lined up in sequence with the gaps, separate processing on each song, so that I can judge how they're going to work in the context of a playlist or an album. That's almost impossible to do if you have a full mix there for multiple songs as well. You could probably do it with complicated routing through buses and all the rest of it, but as I say, I think the risk of overwhelm is quite significant there. And I mean, just in terms of my processing, I know myself, when I'm focusing in on a mix and you're kind of zooming in from looking at the kick drum and how that relates to the bass and whether it fits in with the rhythm guitars, and then kind of pulling back out and going, does this make me want to dance? Does it make me want to laugh or cry? Whatever the music is meant to do, is it working on that sense? To then zoom back out again and say, and how does it fit with the other songs in the album? You know, how does the relative balance of this song with that song work? The gaps. For me, it's just too much. I think there's a real value in taking some time. So if you possibly can, I mean, if you're working for clients or for friends, that's easy. But if you can, take a little bit of time between the mixing and the mastering process so you come to it with fresh ears, because I mean, that's one of the most valuable things that going to a mastering engineer can give you, is some objectivity. Somebody coming to it for the first time and just saying, okay, this is what I think needs to happen based on my initial impression of this music. And the closer you can get to that mindset yourself, the better. That's another advantage of listening on another system, is it just gives you a completely different perspective. Just hearing it outside of the room where you're so tied up in the story of why it sounded this way and why that's that way and all the rest of it, to get a fresh perspective is really helpful and important for the mastering process. I think it's also important to say that the key of mastering is balancing, not matching. Don't think I have to make my song sound like reference track XYZ. It can be useful to use reference tracks, and that's another great way to understand what you're hearing with your monitoring. Another way to cope with any limitations your monitoring might have is, if you've got a song that sounds great to you in the outside world, bring it into the studio and listen to it. However it sounds in the studio is how you need your music to sound if it's going to work out there as well. But you don't have to match it. You just need to balance it, to get it so that it's in the right ballpark, so that it feels cohesive next to the other songs in the album or your reference tracks or whatever it might be. I think another thing that helps with the mastering mindset is to work fast, is to, I mean, if I think maybe the first song on an album probably takes me about between half an hour to an hour to get right. But after that, they come much more rapidly. And a lot of that time is just spent figuring out, okay, what should this sound like? What were the artist and the producers trying to achieve, and how can I help them get closer to that? Once you know where that is, then if you can master a song in 15 minutes or half an hour, that's kind of ideal. A whole album in 4 to 6 hours is a kind of a good benchmark to have. Now, having said that, don't expect to be able to do that straight away. The first album I mastered took me 2 days, and that was with mentoring with, I worked at a professional mastering facility with people training me, and I then had to redo the whole thing because I was so far off the plot. Not in the sense of matching the songs with each other, but that initial decision of what should this album sound like. And it took a long time for me to reach that speed. But try not to get too caught up in the weeds. Try and go with first impressions. You listen to it and say, okay, actually that's a bit bass heavy. Make a broad general adjustment, move on to there. How's the loudness? Try and keep moving through, make bold, swift decisions. Often those are the best. So those are my 3 M's of mastering: monitoring, metering, and mindset. If you can get your head around those and get those 3 things working for you, a lot of everything else will start falling into place much more easily. I said in the first video, I genuinely believe it's about understanding why you're doing things, what your goal is. That's more important than mastering, than which EQ you use or which compressor or, any of those things. So hopefully that will help you get better results with your home mastering or your mastering in general. And if you would like more information like this, I've made a free PDF for you. It's called the Home Mastering Guide. You can get it at homemasteringguide.com. It's a simple PDF. It takes you through the 6 steps that I think are essential to be able to release your music with complete confidence. And it covers all of the things that I'm talking about in these videos. It goes into a bit more depth on some things, maybe other things aren't covered quite so in depth, but together I think they make a great package to help you get better results mastering your music or the music of your clients or your friends. So please subscribe to the channel to make sure you get the rest of the videos in this series. And I'll see you for the next video. My name's Ian Shepherd. Thanks for listening.